Welcome in. It is so great to have you with us today. We have a truly compelling deep dive lined up for you.
We really do. It's a massive topic.
Yeah, we are setting our sights on the highly anticipated 2026 Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly election.
Right.
And specifically, we're going to look at the disruptive forces trying to just completely rewrite the rules of the political game in that state.
Which is no small feat.
Exactly. So, our mission today is to unpack this really complex, shifting landscape. And we're focusing specifically on one fiercely independent party, that's the Nam Tamil Kachchi, or NTK, and their entirely unique approach to running a government.
They call it their methodology of governance.
Right, methodology of governance. And to do this, we are pulling from a pretty substantial stack of sources today. We've got a data-driven ResearchGate forecast predicting the 2026 election outcomes.
We also have a very detailed strategic blueprint of the NTK's actual platform.
Yes, plus Wikipedia's breakdown of the state's historical alliances and some official news alongside YouTube transcripts covering a really sweeping clash over state versus national education policies.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this. In a political system that has basically been dominated by two entrenched giants for half a century, how exactly does a smaller independent party try to break the wheel?
I mean, that is the defining question of this entire election cycle, really. Because to understand the scale of what the NTK is attempting, we first have to establish the status quo.
Right, the baseline.
Exactly. Historically, Tamil Nadu operates as this bipolar Dravidian battleground. For anyone listening who might not be completely familiar, the Dravidian movement is a decades-old socio-political force in South India. It's heavily centered on regional identity, social justice, linguistic pride.
And that movement basically birthed the two major alliances.
Yeah, for half a century, state power has just swung back and forth like a pendulum between the DNK and the AIA-DMK alliances.
And looking at that ResearchGate paper, the data shows those two giants are still very much dominating the board.
Oh, absolutely. The paper projects the incumbent DMK-led Secular Progressive Alliance as the frontrunner right now. They're looking at a 43 to 47% vote share.
That's massive.
It is. And then the AIADMK-led front, which now actually includes national players like the BJP and regional forces like the PMK, they're the main challenger. They're sitting at a projected 35 to 39% vote share.
So you essentially have these two juggernauts taking up roughly 80% of the electorate before the game even really begins.
Pretty much, yeah.
But then you have the disruptor, the Nam Tamil Kachchi, led by Chief Coordinator Seaman.
Right.
Now, they hold a solid, reliable baseline vote share of about 6 to 7%. But when you look at their strategy for 2026, they aren't just trying to survive or play kingmaker for one of the big alliances.
No, they're aiming to fundamentally upend this entire duopoly.
And the way they are doing it is through a strategy of absolute isolationism. They are outright refusing to form alliances with anyone. They are contesting all 234 assembly seats completely solo.
It's a really striking move.
Yeah.
Because in Indian politics, and especially in state elections, coalition building is universally seen as the only practical way to survive.
You have to have partners.
Right. But the NTK is actively rejecting that playbook. And they're doing this to preserve what they call their nationalist purity. They want to draw a very sharp, undeniable contrast between themselves and what they view as the opportunistic coalition politics of the two major parties.
So they're betting that voters are just exhausted by these alliances of convenience.
Exactly. They're hoping everyday voters will reward ideological consistency over mere political pragmatism.
And they're bringing that consistency to their candidate selection in a way that is just incredibly detailed. The sources highlight that the NTK is fielding exactly 117 men and 117 women as their candidates across the state.
A perfect 50% gender parity.
I honestly had to read that specific detail twice, because achieving that perfect split in any democracy is rare, let alone in what is traditionally a deeply patriarchal political environment.
It's an immense logistical challenge. I mean, to find and vet that many viable female candidates when the historical pipeline has so heavily favored men.
Yeah.
But it's a very powerful visual. They're trying to dismantle those patriarchal norms in Tamil politics and appeal directly to a new generation of voters. Voters who want to see actual proportional representation on the ballot.
Not just lip service in a speech.
Exactly.
And speaking of the ballot, we also have to look at where the leadership is physically placing themselves on the map, because Seaman has made a major strategic geographic shift.
He has.
According to the coverage of their recent Tiruchi conference, he is moving from his previous constituency in Thiruvattriyur to contest from the Karaikudi constituency.
And that geographic shift is highly intentional. By moving to Karaikudi, he's signaling a direct challenge to established parties in the southern and central regions of the state.
It's expanding their footprint.
Yes, it's a loud statement that the NTK is not just some fringe urban phenomenon. They intend to be a statewide force capable of contesting the rural heartlands just as fiercely as the city centers.
Okay, wait. So if they're completely isolating themselves, turning down alliances, and taking on these massive political machines single-handedly, how on earth are they convincing voters to actually listen to them?
That's the challenge.
What is the immediate hook? Because the standard political playbook tells us that a party going into a major election releases a manifesto filled with promises, right? Cash transfers, subsidized goods, outright freebies.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The NTK is actively refusing to offer those traditional freebies.
Right.
Instead of a standard manifesto, they're proposing what they call a methodology of governance. And this pivot is rooted in their central critique of the current system, which they have labeled moneyocracy.
Moneyocracy. That is a heavy accusation.
It is. They claim that under the traditional Dravidian model, electoral victories are essentially bought with cash and gifts, which creates this endless cycle of dependence.
So voters get a short-term handout, but the structural issues remain broken.
Exactly. So their methodology of governance is focused entirely on systemic reform rather than transactional charity. They literally want to rewrite the underlying machinery of how the government functions on a daily basis.
Let's drill down into what that machinery actually looks like, because the sources detail some pretty elaborate policies around transparency and accountability.
Yeah, they do.
First, they want to create a statewide transparency portal modeled after Rajasthan's Jan Suchna. And for anyone who hasn't heard of it, Jan Suchna is essentially a digital platform that gives citizens direct, itemized, real-time access to government spending and recruitment data.
Without having to file tedious right-to-information requests.
Exactly. The NTK wants to bring that to Tamil Nadu to strip away the red tape. They are also proposing that all government tenders above 1 lakh rupees be made fully electronic to prevent rigging.
Transparency is the first step there. But accountability is the mechanism that encourages it. And that is where their proposed Right to Services Act comes into play.
This is the policy that really caught my attention. I want you, the listener, to think about your own frustrations with government bureaucracy. Think about sitting in a fluorescent lit office, waiting for a vehicle registration or a building permit or a business license for hours or even months while your paperwork just mysteriously stalls.
We've all been there.
Right. Imagine a system where the government official responsible for that delay is financially penalized, literally fined out of their own pocket for making you wait beyond a legally mandated time frame, or for soliciting a bribe to speed things up. That is the exact universal frustration the NTK is tapping into.
It represents a profound psychological shift in the relationship between the state and the public. They are framing the citizen not as a passive beneficiary of state charity, but as an active auditor of state performance.
An auditor, I like that.
And that idea of making the citizen an auditor doesn't just stop at government bureaucracy, it bleeds right into how they want to handle the state's literal lifeblood, which is agriculture and the economy.
Right, because the NTK heavily critiques the current state budget. They view the existing model as deficit-driven, heavily reliant on unsustainable borrowing to fund those very welfare programs we just talked about.
Yeah.
Their proposed alternative is a radical shift toward what they call agrarian sovereignty. They want to make agriculture the primary self-sustaining industry of the state.
And their agricultural policies are highly specific to the cultural and economic landscape of Tamil Nadu. For instance, they want to lift the longstanding ban on toddy tapping.
We should probably clarify what that is for anyone outside the region. Toddy tapping is the traditional practice of harvesting sap from palm trees to make a natural, locally fermented drink.
Exactly. And the NTK is framing this as a healthy, rural, income-generating alternative to TASMAC.
TASMAC being the state's massive centralized liquor monopoly.
Right. It generates enormous revenue for the government, but it's heavily criticized for fueling addiction and draining resources from the working class. By unbanning toddy tapping, the NTK argues they can decentralize that revenue and put it directly back into the hands of rural farmers.
They're also focused heavily on value addition. The blueprint promises multi-district cold storage networks specifically for mango and flower farmers in the Dindigul region, alongside government-owned pulp manufacturing units.
So farmers are creating finished, shelf-stable products, not just exporting cheap raw materials that spoil quickly,
It's all about removing the middleman.
whether that middleman is a corporate buyer or a corrupt official. Which actually brings us to one of their most provocative claims regarding infrastructure. The NTK calls out what they term the micropolitics of water scarcity.
How exactly does water become a political tool?
Well, according to the NTK's blueprint, they allege that established politicians intentionally delay critical river linking and tank rejuvenation projects. The logic here is brutal, but simple. If a farming community's water supply is permanently fixed, they become economically independent. But if they're kept in a state of artificial drought, they remain dependent on emergency government relief, water trucks, and political handouts.
So the NTK's solution is to construct a purely scientific, depoliticized water grid to permanently end this cycle.
Right, to give farmers absolute sovereignty over their irrigation.
It is a very ambitious promise. And speaking of ambitious infrastructure, we have to look at their approach to public services, starting with their healthcare overhaul.
Right.
The NTK is proposing a strict zero referral policy. According to the blueprint, they want to upgrade every single government hospital in the state to a multi-specialty facility.
The goal being that no patient should ever have to be referred to a hospital hours away in a major city for critical care.
Exactly. And even more ambitious, they want to attach a medical college to every major government hospital to ensure a constant, localized pipeline of doctors.
It's a staggering infrastructure goal. Building out that level of medical capacity across every district requires immense capital, which of course circles back to their argument about reallocating funds away from freebies and into permanent assets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they extend this philosophy of localized reform to the justice system as well. The sources highlight their campaign for humanitarian justice, specifically their demand to release prisoners who have been incarcerated for over 10 years and have demonstrated genuine reform.
So another example of their focus on systemic rehabilitation rather than just endless punitive measures.
Exactly.
Now, education is arguably the most fiercely debated topic in this entire election. And looking at the source material objectively, and I should note right here for you listening, just to be completely clear, we are strictly reporting the facts from our sources today. We are not endorsing any particular side in this politically charged debate.
Right. We're just laying out what the documents say.
Exactly. And there are three very distinct, highly polarizing visions competing for the spotlight here. Let's lay out what each camp is proposing, starting at the national level.
The clash over education in Tamil Nadu is as much about cultural identity and language as it is about academics. First, you have the union government's push. The union education minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, has been urging the state to implement the National Education Policy, or NEP 2020.
Right.
A key component of the NEP is a three-language formula, which encourages the learning of Hindi alongside English and the regional language. It also recommends that the local language, in this case, Tamil be the medium of instruction up to Standard 5.
But the incumbent state government is fiercely opposing the NEP. Chief Minister M.K. Stalin and Deputy CM Udayanithi Salan recently launched their own counter policy, the State Education Policy 2025.
Yeah, they're pushing back hard.
The YouTube transcript of the launch event shows just how heavily they're leaning into this. The DMK's policy completely rejects the three-language formula in favor of a strict two-language formula, just Tamil and English. And they're backing up their approach with recent data. At the launch, they celebrated the fact that over 900 government school students have been successfully placed into premium higher education institutes, including prestigious IITs domestically and universities abroad in Taiwan and Japan.
Which is a significant achievement.
It is. The DMK's argument is that their state policy focuses on critical thinking, global competitiveness, and social justice, rather than rote memorization or the forced adoption of a third language.
And then you have the name Tamil Kachi's alternative. While the NTK firmly agrees with the DNK's opposition to the union government's NEP, they argue the state hasn't gone nearly far enough.
How so?
The NTK advocates for a strict Tamil-first approach. In their methodology of governance, learning in Tamil wouldn't just be an option. It would be the exclusive and mandatory medium of instruction up to Class V across all schools.
All schools.
Yes, they argue this is the only way to ensure true linguistic sovereignty and cognitive development in early childhood.
They also take a very hard line on standardized testing, specifically regarding NEET.
Yes. For context, NEET is the highly competitive centralized entrance examination required for students who want to study medicine in India. The NTK is calling for the complete and absolute abolition of the NEET exam in Tamil Nadu.
And their argument, which resonates heavily in rural areas, from what the sources say, is that a centralized, standardized test creates an insurmountable disadvantage for students from poorer rural backgrounds. Students who simply cannot afford the expensive private coaching centers that urban students utilize to crack the exam.
Precisely.
So, what does this all mean? We have a complex landscape. You have the established Dravidian alliances holding the lion's share of the electorate, and the NTK pushing a radical, policy dense methodology of governance while refusing alliances. But what happens to this dynamic when you introduce an absolute wild card into the mix?
Oh, yes, the wild card.
Because the 2026 election features a brand new third pole. Enter actor Vijay and his newly formed political party, Tamilaga Vetri Kajagam, or TVK.
The entry of a major film star into Tamil Nadu politics is a time-honored tradition, and it always shakes the board. This is where the data from the ResearchGate paper becomes incredibly useful for separating hype from reality.
Right, because you currently have TVK functionaries claiming in the press that they already command a 28% vote share simply by entering the race.
But if we analyze that claim objectively against historical election data, it is logically highly improbable.
Why is that? Because he does have a massive fan base.
He does, but fan bases do not translate one-to-one into voting blocks overnight. Historically in Tamil Nadu, celebrity-led or third-front parties like actor Vijaykanth's DMDK in the 2000s, or more recently Kamal Hassan's MNM, they took years of exhaustive grassroots groundwork to procure just 3 to 8% of the vote in their debuts.
Oh, wow.
The structural reality of voter loyalty means no new party simply walks in and captures nearly 30% of the statewide vote on day one.
Right, so the 28% claim is almost certainly political propaganda designed to build early momentum and project strength.
Most likely.
But the research paper points out something crucial. Even if 28% is a myth, the actual disruption TVK brings is very real. The data suggests that a combined anti-establishment voter base of the TVK and the NTK could realistically capture somewhere between 10 and 15% of the total vote.
And we have to remember the mechanics of how elections work in this region to understand why that number is so dangerous to the establishment. Because Tamil Nadu, like the rest of India, uses a first-past-the-post electoral system.
Let's break that down. First past the post means you don't need a 50% majority to win a seat. You literally just need one more vote than the runner-up.
Precisely. If a combined TVK and NTK bloc captures 10 to 15% of the electorate, they are likely peeling away crucial youth, urban, and undecided voters from the major parties.
Making them a massive spoiler.
Exactly. They become a staggering spoiler. They might not win a majority of the 234 seats themselves, but they have the mathematical power to completely derail the margins for both the DMK and AIDMK alliances in dozens of tight constituencies.
A candidate who used to win comfortably by a 5% margin could suddenly find themselves losing because those swing votes went to the independent disruptors.
It changes the entire math of the election.
Which brings us to the ultimate summary of what we are watching unfold. The 2026 Tamil Nadu election is shaping up to be the ultimate stress test of voter behavior. We are going to see whether traditional, deeply entrenched political alliances, backed by historical weight and elaborate welfare machinery, can withstand the highly disruptive, policy-heavy campaigns of independent players like the NTK.
It's a collision between the established, pragmatic Dravidian political model and an emerging, highly specific form of regional nationalism. The NTK is prioritizing structural administrative reform over the standard political playbook of coalition building and immediate welfare distribution.
And that leads me to a final provocative thought for you to mull over today as we wrap up. The NTK is risking their entire political future on the promise of structural reform, their methodology of governance. But to do that, they are actively, intentionally refusing to offer the traditional freebie incentives, the cash, the appliances, the loan waivers that voters have grown accustomed to receiving during election cycles over the past few decades.
It's a massive gamble.
It is. If a purely reform-driven, no freebie strategy actually succeeds in winning significant power in a state that is historically famous for its deep welfare populism, what does that mean for the future of Democratic campaigns worldwide? Will everyday voters actually choose the promise of long-term systemic reform over immediate, tangible financial benefits when they step into the privacy of the voting booth?
That is the ultimate test of human nature and political maturity. If they do, the resulting shockwaves will echo far beyond the borders of Tamil Nadu.
It really will be a case study for the history books. We will be watching this so closely as 2026 approaches. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we will see you next time.